The disruption caused by the COVID-19 pandemic creates a lucrative opportunity for New Zealand exporters to China, including a digital transformation. Well, to discuss, New Zealand-China Council Chair John McKinnon is with us. So, John, you've created this report against a backdrop of global economic growth and a slowdown. Has that been a huge factor in your conclusions?
Well, the conclusions are broadly that the services trade is very significant for New Zealand, but it's been deeply affected by pandemic. There are opportunities in terms of a resumption of movement which would allow education and tourism to pick up again, but we're also highlighting the fact that there are ways of connecting through digital means or otherwise, which do not need to be constrained by the pandemic. But let's not think that this is easy. It's not straightforward, but it does provide some new avenues for trade.
So tourism, education, are they likely to rebound to pre-COVID levels?
Well, I had a crystal ball, I would tell you, but I'm not sure. We would like to think that they would. I think the demand in China for what New Zealand has in terms of scenery and in terms of safe English language education is still there. As to how and when that will manifest itself, that's harder to say, but I would like to think that even if we don't attain quite the levels of pre-COVID, we will see China once again being a large part of that market.
Digital transformation and technology, is there a lucrative opportunity there for New Zealand companies?
Well, I think there are opportunities, and it's often, as you will know, a case of business by business and sector by sector. But if you can take an example, and there are many, many helpful examples given in the report, one is of the Les Mills gyms, which basically have found ways of offering digital services to their potential customers. So instead of having people come into a gym, they're delivering courses online or training courses online, or even fitness equipment to be used at the home. So I think what it requires is a business, and far be it from me to tell businesses how they should deal with these challenges, but it's for each business to figure out a way of advancing the availability of its services in this new environment. But China is certainly a big market for that.
You're certainly pointing to a growing demand for technology, and as consumers in China grow that need, New Zealand could fill that opportunity.
Well, I think there are opportunities there. China is in many ways, particularly, of course, in the big cities, a very, very sophisticated and advanced society. And so the availability of technological means to deliver services is something that people in China, in the cities, are very, very used to. And that's an area I would have thought New Zealand businesses can take advantage of in this new environment.
What are the hurdles to get back into China?
Well, I would say the biggest hurdle at the moment is simply that it's very difficult to travel to and fro, and that's a function, of course, of the COVID policies. So that will at some point change. We of course don't know when it will change, and there's been lots of coverage of that recently. But it is certainly a barrier, and that will be something which, when it changes, that will give the opportunity for businesses to be back in connection, face-to-face connection with their Chinese partners and Chinese customers.
So this is a slow burn over a number of years, is it?
Yeah, we wanted to put out this report for two reasons. One was to say, look, actually, this has been a very, very large part of the New Zealand-China economic relationship. I mean, we think about it in terms of old milk powder and logs, but there's a lot more besides. The second to say, well, look, okay, things are pretty difficult at the moment, but let's not assume that's going to continue forever. And these are the areas where we can see this developing in the future.
So you've tried to create an optimistic report for the future, really?
Well, I would say a realistic report, Jono. I mean, it's got optimism, of course, because I think we want to make sure people realize there are opportunities there, even if they can't physically be in China. But at the same time, let's not imagine this is not a competitive and regulated environment, and businesses which go in there need to know exactly what they're about.
Who else is chasing China? Or are we also facing intense competition from other countries?
Well, I think New Zealand always faces competition in the world. I mean, if you just take one micro example, for instance, the numbers of students that we had from China pre-pandemic was, I think, something like 1 or 2% of the total of Chinese students going overseas. Australia had 14%. So, I mean, you never can imagine that we are alone in China. For every possibility that there is, there'll be a business from some other country or some other part of the world chasing it. But this is a very large market and a very large group of consumers who are interested in what New Zealand has to offer.
You're saying that exports will rebound, but that will be uneven. Why?
Well, I probably would have said something like exports we hope will rebound. But what we cannot forecast precisely is exactly how that will play out, and therefore what the composition of that trade will be. There may be some areas which take a while to pick up again, such as tourism. Education is interesting because in many ways the educational institutes here have already found ways of delivering courses to students in China, which have not required the students to physically come to New Zealand. So I think for every business and every sector, there's going to be a different way of approaching this. And that's why I would say, there are going to be differing results for the differing businesses.
And we're hearing most days now that there's going to be a recession next year. What factors does that come into play here?
Well, if you mean a recession in China.
Well, a global recession in
Global recession,
2023,
because I think
potentially in
the
New
interesting
Zealand.
thing about China is that certainly its growth rates have declined, but it's still continuing to grow, albeit nothing like the rate that it was growing pre-pandemic. In other words, there are probably opportunities in China which are still there for those who wish to pursue them. Again, a little bit dependent, or more than a little bit dependent, very dependent on what happens in terms of the access to that market. So China, I wouldn't want to say is going to compensate for what's happening elsewhere in the world, but it's certainly not a market which a savvy, agile business in New Zealand would want to neglect.
John McKinnon, thanks for your time.
Thank you very much indeed, John.